that's me. The company I work for is called Give and Gain Group Services. If you go to my website, ejo.github.io, you can find this talk on there should you need to look at the slides and things like that. And that's a bit of a blurb about me. A few modules on CPAN, working with Perl for over a decade now. I'm the idiot that decided to volunteer to maintain CGI.pm. And I moved to Switzerland a couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago now. And to work in reverse order on the title of this talk, why non-profit? Well, as I said, the company I work for is a non-profit foundation based in Switzerland. Originally based in South Africa. I moved to Switzerland about 7 years ago now to be more central in Europe. And we have a platform that allows non-profits to raise funds. I kind of describe it as like the Kickstarter for non-profits, but we're not really like Kickstarter in that you don't have to reach a goal to receive your funds. You get halfway, we give you your funds, and it's all non-profit. So we have quite a few big non-profit foundations using the platform. And we're primarily Perl. I'd say probably 99% Perl. We had a bit of Python before, but that's kind of gone away now. A bit of Bash here and there. But largely Perl, and it's been largely Perl since 2001. So that maybe gives you an idea of what the Perl was like. If you think about 2001, web development in Perl, etc., etc. And that kind of takes me to the fun part. I'm saying fun, I mean everybody has a different idea of what they think fun is in development, but I kind of think of this as kind of how we want to be able to develop because it allows us to have more fun and not get stressed and worry about things we don't want to worry about. And the interesting thing is when I joined the company, this already existed. So they were using quite an old code base, but using Git, and we had code reviews and continuous build, and that's fantastic. But the Perl didn't really lend itself to that because it was CGI.pm. It was a bespoke templating system. It was mod Perl, so not fantastic to deal with. Generally, all the classic signs of a legacy CGI app. Mercifully, it wasn't using CGI's templating functions, and we managed to turn mod Perl off quite easily because it wasn't giving us any benefit. We weren't using any Apache modules or anything like that. It was just purely there for we need to be quicker, and that was very easy to solve by looking at the code and doing some profiling with developing IT-prof and look, we're doing all this work we don't need to. So that was one of the first things I did is mod Perl, go away. And that's kind of what the site used to look like, very Web 1.0, I guess you would say. But I mean, what's a key thing that kind of stands out there apart from the big Cal logo? I mean, to me, it was over $100 million raised for non-profits. So it's very difficult to say that the code is bad code. You know, $100 million over 10 years for non-profits is amazing. And it was running without a problem for 15 years, and the functionality has gone up like that. And it was reasonably well factored. We didn't have any 5,000 line methods anywhere. It was relatively easy to add tests for the various functions and things like that, which was kind of a blessing. So what we started to do is looked at how we could kind of move to a more modern Perl system. And we kind of took the approach of, well, we want the old code, we want to move that away because that's not going to be good for the future. And we couldn't really rewrite it from scratch because we all know that's not really an approach you can take. So we looked at ways we could migrate piece by piece the code into a new system. And Mojolicious is kind of the one that's getting a lot of traffic at the moment, a lot of noise on the blogs, and it's kind of bleeding edge, which is a good thing and a bad thing, but I'll get to that later on. And we looked at Mojolicious and said, well, this looks great. What about the other frameworks that we could use? So Dancer, Catalyst. I I've used both of these in the past, and both excellent web frameworks. But we kind of we put Catalyst away to the side because that's kind of very big, very all-encompassing, not quite what we needed. And Dancer was kind of in transition. I don't know if you're aware that they've been doing a big Dancer 2 rewrite, and it's looking really fantastic. But 2 years ago, it was kind of Dancer or Dancer 2, and it wasn't quite there. But we were also using Mojolicious in one of our internal systems, so there was already some knowledge of the system there. And this is kind of the blurb for Mojolicious. It's the next generation framework because it has all of this stuff. It's like I said, it's very bleeding edge, so you want to do something web-based and it's new stuff, then Mojolicious tends to be there straight away. And the core developers aren't afraid of adding stuff that maybe they might throw away quite quickly. And just to give you an example of how trivial it is to create a little Mojolicious app, this is Mojolicious Lite, which is kind of a prototyping part of Mojolicious, where you can just define a route and render something. So it's literally 4 or 5 lines of code, and it's UTF-8 aware. It's very Perlish as well. I find Dancer has kind of its very own, its specific domain-specific language, whereas Mojolicious feels very Perlish, both in the app code and the templating code, which again has its plus points and its bad points. The developers I'm working with, most of them are new to Perl, which is fantastic, but you have to be careful with the approach you take in writing the code. If you're going to write very idiomatic Perl, you've got to be careful not to be too terse, because new developers come in, it can be a bit scary. And it's trivial to run. You can just run it on the command line, and it's a web server. You don't need to, well, you probably would stick Apache or Nginx in front of it, but you don't need to. It's just serves immediately. So there's no worry about mod Perl or persistence or anything like that. And one of the very good things I've found with Mojolicious Lite is it's fantastic for testing infrastructure, for making emulators and things like that. So say you have a third-party service that you want to test against. For example, we're using Campaign Monitor, things like that. You can just knock up a quick emulator in 20, 30 lines of code and just point the test at it, which is very, very useful. And it's easy to convert to a full-fat app. You just run a command and it will create your controllers and your public directory and your test directory. So there's no worry about, oh, I've got a prototype now. I have to rewrite the prototype. You don't. It's just one command and it's done for you. So as I said, we were using CGI.pm. And one of the things we wanted to look at is how do we transition from CGI.pm to Mojolicious without just doing it in one big step. And one of the things that Mojolicious offers is it has this huge plugin ecosystem. I think when I last looked at it, there was well over 400 or 500 plugins for Mojolicious. And there are obviously some involved around CGI. So what you can do is you can make Mojolicious actually run your CGI scripts, which is kind of cheating a little bit. The alternative is you kind of grab that code and stick it within Mojolicious, but that's not really solving the problem. And this plugin was written by one of the core Mojo developers, Jan Henning Fossen, Batman, I see. And what you do is you simply point your route at your CGI script. That's a CGI script there. I'm not going to run it, but if I run that on the command line, I think we would have a problem with the UTF-8 there. But we don't have to worry about that. But what we can do is, Mojolicious has a first in, first out routing. So when you define a route here, because it's defined before my plugin, this is now redundant. So we will always run this route. Now what that allows us to do is we can kind of implement A/B testing. We can have a config or a hook within Mojolicious that says run the CGI script or done on CGI script, and that's really useful for A/B testing, for regression testing. No internet connection, so I can't give you an example. But this is one of the heavier pages on the site. And previously it was a bit of a nightmare. Basically, 1,000-line CGI script and global variables, wrapper script. Lots of things that made it difficult to easily test, easily regression test. But now we've changed it to use Mojolicious. We're using the whole modern Perl Civic. It's much cleaner, and we're reusing all these components. So we have a projects object and a categories object, which is used elsewhere in the system. And we're on 5.16, and I'm hoping we'll get onto 5.22 quite quickly. And as I said, we can easily root new things or roll back to the old code. I mean, you could use a config, or you could comment it out, or however you want to approach it. Like I say, A/B testing is very useful. And the big thing is Mojolicious comes with a fantastic testing system as well. So what you can actually do is have your app direct to the old CGI script and still write Mojolicious tests. Very, very trivial to write. It has CSS selectors in Mojo DOM, so it's very easy to get into parts of the HTML and do testing for strings and things like that. But when you switch to the new code, the test is still the same. Of course, that relies on you having written quality tests in the first place, but it's a really good start. And of course, like I say, all the new code itself, the objects, and they all have their own tests anyway, so we're reasonably confident about the coverage there. And this is kind of what the new site looks like now. A bit more Web 2.0. It's very responsive. And I think crucially is it works on mobile platforms as well. That was one of the key factors. We were in the process of doing a big redesign, so this was a great opportunity to look at the back end as well as the front end. It made the front end developers' job much, much easier. Now they're working with Template Toolkit and things like that. So the things we've learned from working with Mojolicious is that it moves very fast. It's not as true these days, but they will still quite willingly break backwards compatibility. But Siri tends to leave that for major releases now. I think their last major release, when was that? So that was back in September 2014. I think they moved to version 6 back in April. I think that was. But there was only a couple of things they deprecated or removed. And that's a graph, which the red ones are breaking changes. So as you can see, there was a kind of, yes, breaking, and then a little bit here, and it's got much more stable. There's one there which was, I don't think, a hugely huge functionality, so it wasn't too big a problem. One of the big complaints, I suppose you could say, that people make is that the documentation isn't very clear with Mojolicious, which I'm not convinced by. A lot of visitors to the IRC channel come in and ask, how do I do this? And straight away, Siri or the developers will say, just paste a link to the documentation. And then they will come back and they're still not quite sure. So I think maybe there's some work that can be done there. It means there is a bit of a learning curve in Mojolicious. And I think that's inherent with it being very Perlish. People look at the examples in the documentation and it's not, maybe if they're not as familiar with Perl, it's not immediately obvious to them what's going on, perhaps. They're used to slightly more verbose code. But I'm not so sure. I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff on Stack Overflow, and the documentation has improved significantly the last 12 months. And of course, I mean, it comes with a set of sensible defaults for your config, and these might not be what you need. So, for example, one of the problems we had is they have a manager process which forks the children, and if a child doesn't respond to a heartbeat within 20 seconds, it will kill that child process. Mojolicious is non-blocking out of the box, but you have to obviously have non-blocking code within your controllers and your libraries. So if you have something that blocks because the query a cause might want to download some reports, and that might take longer than 20 seconds. it turns out it's quite trivial to make it non-blocking because you can wrap your code within a non-blocking subsection, and that allows the manager to still speak to the child process. So there's things like this that might not be as obvious, but again, they're pretty reasonably well documented. So it's just you have to find it first. And of course, exception pages should be added. Again, no internet connection, and it's probably been fixed now. But that was actually a link to the Mojolicious documentation showing a 500 server error, which was their built-in 500 server error page, which is a raptor vomiting a rainbow, which is quite, I mean, it's quite funny, but it's not something you really want to make your site look professional. So, and as I said, the templating syntax is very Perlish, which I'm not convinced by. It means there's a danger of putting too much business logic within your templates. And again, because it's very Perlish, it's not something you can easily point a designer at. It's not immediately obvious where the markup starts and the markup ends, I find. But there are plugins to use different templating engines. So, for example, we're using Mojolicious plugin template TT renderer, which allows us to use template toolkit. And I'm sure there are others for template xslate, things like that. We took that approach because we weren't 100% sure on Mojolicious at the time, and we wanted to be confident that we could move our templates to another framework with not much overhead, not much work. So in summary, we had a path. We kind of walked along that path, and we released this back in October. We've had good feedback. Of course, there's been a few bugs here and there, but overall it's been very good. I mean, the key thing is we removed a ton of boilerplate. That was the problem with the old system. It's so much boilerplate hiding the actual business logic. One Perl and of course tests. That's always good. Any questions?
Yes, please.
Yes.
I worry about the interface between the non-blocking code and blocking code, and that any blocking code can mess up the non-blocking side.
Yeah.
Do you have any caveats or major tips to avoid falling into rabbit holes there?
The non-blocking code is, you mean how is it implemented within Mojolicious?
Yes.
It's, I think the way it's been described for other frameworks is callback hell. That's not the case in Mojolicious.
Right.
You literally have a list of subroutines. So my first step is this, and then the second step is this, sub this, third step is sub this.
Is that like promises?
In a way, but not. It's not kind of the same thing. But the key is you're not like that. You're like that, and each subroutine receives the objects first, and then the list of arguments. So it's very clear what's going on, and it's trivial to make your application non-blocking from the Mojolicious point of view. Obviously, if you're stuck down in the database, something's blocking, but the child is still free to serve requests, and Mojolicious will scale to a ridiculous number of requests out of the box. We found that our load average on our machines is now, it's nothing. I mean, even my Perl looks heavy compared to Mojolicious, so it's really good. Anybody else?
What environment are you running Mojo in then? You were talking about Apache before the fact.
Yeah, we still have Apache serving static content.
Right, because Mojo has a static.
It does. It can act as a web server to serve everything. But what we found is it's better to serve the static content from the upstream web server. So we have a proxy through to Mojolicious.
Oh, right.
And then we can change this to Nginx or use Squid or whatever the modern equivalent is these days.
So your other web servers really are just proxies then?
Yeah.
Hypnotodes.
Yeah, we're using Hypnotoad. Mobo is the development server and Hypnotoad is the production. So,
And that's scalable.
yeah, it's, like I say, I mean, we have made our code non-blocking, but in the sense from Mojolicious' point of view. And we can scale, it scales to ridiculous numbers out of the box. And you can always play around with the config to have more workers and things like that.
Do you have database connections going on between your web processors and what's rendering the template? Is,
We have, so the templates kind of, we have the objects in Moose and Mouse, and they're kind of passed into the templates. So there is some business logic within the templates, but it's more about rendering, a list of, for example, we have one page which is a list of donations, and some of the optimization I did was, well, it turns out that one person can make more than one donation. So what happens is you end up building the same object more than once. But because of the way the code is laid out now, it's trivial to, down in the new objects, just return the same object. So there is some business logic there within the template, but because it's nicely factored, all the concerns are separated. It's trivial to optimize this component or this component.
and when you're creating those sub-objects,
Yeah.
do they rely on information from the database?
Yes, they're doing database queries. So
And how do you make it so that those database queries don't block the web server?
in a sense, they do block. But the way Mojolicious handles that is, its child process, it's running in a non-blocking flow.
Yeah.
So that child is free to actually serve another request whilst this is happening.
Yeah.
I hesitate to call it magic within Mojolicious, but it feels like it sometimes. But it's all very clear. As I said, the non-blocking flow is very clear. Does that make sense? Anybody else?
It's not directly linked to this, but it's an easy way to identify blocking code.
The easy way to identify it within, if you're using Mojolicious, would be to say low heartbeat. That will tell you that you've got blocking code, and then you have to find it. What I've done in the past is use profiling devel NYT prof, and you run it and see, okay, we're spending 7 seconds here, what's going on? And usually it's because 90% of the time it's a database or the network, or you've got a really slow file system, CPU or something like that. And it's difficult to make, certainly in Perl 5, it's difficult to make that purely non-blocking, because if you're waiting on a database query, you're waiting on a database query. You have to try and make sure that the thing upstream isn't waiting on it, which Mojolicious makes it very easy to do. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much.